Good evening, everybody. I promised myself last month I wouldn't tap on the table, so I'll just rub my hands together. Welcome to Office Hours. I'll give you a bit of forewarning. The energy levels are a touch low today. I've had 3 cloud builds in the last few weeks. I did a webinar last night, customer webinar this morning. So yeah, it's been webinar and presentation central the last sort of couple of weeks or so. A bit of travel as well. So I have to admit, best job in the world, but yeah, a little bit of burnout. But after all, yeah, surely I'm entitled to a bit of burnout in 2025 because after all, we're in March. Okay, not so good. Anyway, lots of fun tonight. Hopefully, lots of interesting stuff. We'll cover some normal stuff. We'll cover some user group stuff as well. Let me share my screen and we'll get in. Oh, before I should say, I've already seen some stuff on the chat, so someone can, that's the chat, that's fine. I'm assuming you can hear me, otherwise someone should have shouted on the chat by now, and I'm assuming you can see me, so I think we're all good to go. Let me now find somewhere to share my screen. Let's have a look. So as always, getting in touch is easy. Just scan the QR code, even with my ugly mug in there, it should work. Linktree/Connor is where you get in touch with all the other social media channels, my email address, blog, GitHub repo, Facebook, Instagram, etc., etc., etc. All the normal ways of getting in touch. And I think by virtue of doing a webinar last night, if you're on the EMEA developer webinar last night, then yeah, you can also reach me on the EMEAdeveloper.oracle.com Slack, something or other. So there's Slack channels and all sorts of things. As I always say, if you're new to Office Hours, first of all, welcome. And secondly, don't panic when you see the content a little bit all over the place on the slides. We turn this into a YouTube video, and as a result, we have to shift the content a little bit such that my face doesn't block anything that might be of use. Because as I'm sure you know, there's nothing more frustrating than when that keyword that you're after to learn has been blocked up by someone with a nose as big as mine. A few bits and pieces that I like to cover always at the start of every month's Office Hours, because as part of my job as well as being customer success is obviously I have a vested interest in user groups. So hopefully anyone in Europe went along to Apex World last week. I put this, even though this is an event that's gone now, I put this on there because my manager, Mike Hitch, was there. For all intents and purposes, I heard did a fantastic talk. Mike has been traveling a little bit more of late, which is good. So if he comes to your event or conference, please take a chance to say hello. He's a lovely guy. And what's more, how often do you get a chance to actually sit down and chat with the guy that invented one of the most popular low-code development products on the planet? That's pretty special. So if you're there, hopefully it was good. For me, well, I went to Cloud World Mumbai, then I went to Cloud World Singapore, then I went to Cloud World Sydney, as I said, bounced around a little bit. The Cloud World tour, I think, is done for APAC, but it continues on. I think Sao Paulo, London, I think was just a couple of days ago, but I think there's a few more in the Latin America region still go. So there's a few more Cloud Worlds to go, trying to bring the goodies from Vegas to places close to you to go visit. I had a really enjoyable time in Sydney. Had a chat with some customers. And I think for anyone that hasn't ever run a conference before, typically if you run a free event, you typically get about 50% registration in terms of 50% of the people that registered actually come along. At Sydney, I think we had something like 78, 80%. So that was absolutely mind-blowing. Oh, the chat line's going thing. Judith has said the Israel user group has resumed its activity, so keep your eyes open for that. So hopefully as things settle down in that part of the world, we can resume going to various user groups around the world. I've been to the Israel let's try that again. I've been to the Israel User Group Conference a couple of times, fantastic events. And yeah, so if you get a chance in that area, support your user groups. You already said, how are you burned out with all that liquor behind you? That's a fair point. This is one of those things I shouldn't admit on a call, especially one that's being recorded, but that's just one of many shelves that float around this house. Generally, all of them adorned with gin. But I digress. Let's get back into the slides. The reason I wanted to talk about Cloud World Singapore was not necessarily for that event itself, which was a big success, was this is an example of if you want to bring content to your local area. Heli from Finland, an Oracle Ace director, reached out to Oracle in Singapore and said, hey, Connor's going to be in the area, I'm going to be in the area. Adrian, who's a Singapore local but now lives in Canada, he's going to be in the area. Why don't we do a little event? And so literally with very short notice and just a little bit of collusion, a bit of email out, etc., we ran a technology day. And to give an example of what I'm trying to convey here is, you think, okay, fine, we're a little technology day. Heli reached out to Juan Loaiza, EVP at Oracle, literally sort of, just below Larry Ellison level kind of stuff, runs the entire database division. He was in Singapore for Cloud World, and Heli said, hey, you wouldn't mind dropping in and having a chat to 50 or 100 so delegates at this user group meeting? He said, yeah, sure, no problems. So literally, you can see it wasn't a massive event. That was about half the room. You had another half of the room. So I had about 100 people in total during the day. But yeah, even with something that small, senior executive at Oracle, if they're not too busy, will drop in and have a chat, whatever. One was there for about 45 minutes, just answering questions about the database and where he sees AI going. So don't be discouraged. If you don't have a local user group, there isn't really a Singapore local user group. This was put together mainly by Heli and Oracle Singapore. But yeah, reach out to your local Oracle office, see if you can get a meetup going, and you can, get some community going in your local area. Couple of things coming up. The Ascend conference, I was lucky enough to be accepted to talk there. So if you're in Florida, please come along and say hi. I've never been to Florida, never been to Orlando. So I'll be heading to Florida in June for the Ascend conference. The reason I've managed to get approved for that is because it's adjacent to the Kscope conference, which is probably one of the biggest developer conferences for Oracle going around each year. And I'll be doing a couple of talks there as well. So if you're in, where's that? That's in Grapevine in Texas. If you're in Texas or Florida, I don't think there's probably many Americans on this call tonight, but if you're watching the recording, please come say hi. And if you're in that area, please go along and support those events. A couple of things coming up. The Polish Oracle User Group have got their call for papers out. What's the date today? The 27th of March. I think 3 more days for their call for papers. Hugely popular event. I think it's their 10th anniversary this year. So that'll be extra special. So yeah, if you're a speaker or even just an attendee, get along to the Polish User event. That's in September. Also another call for papers. I think this is the 30th anniversary of this user group, the Croatia user group. To think a user group going successfully for 30 years with all the changes in technology in the world, that is a remarkable achievement. So once again, call for papers is open there. You've got a bit more time there if you're a speaker. You got till May, I think. But yeah, if you're an attendee in that area, try to get along to that. Literally go to Croatia at the end of the conference, drive for a few hours, end up in Italy, have a holiday, etc. Fantastic way to see Europe, as well as get a great serve of tech content. All of that comes to that slide that I put up every single month, which is support your local user groups. The more community we can build, the more we all prosper. Because what's the saying? None of us is as much as all of us. That's one of my favorite terms when it comes to growing the knowledge in our community. One last thing is, obviously you've heard about Oracle Database AI Free. It's been out now for a year or so, but just to let you know, it's not just standing still. Every time we do a release update for 23 AI for our cloud and engineered systems, we're also rolling those changes into the free version. So I think about maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, if you now download the latest 23 AI, you'll get 23.7 as opposed to 23.6, 5, 4, etc. as it's been in the past. So yeah, PSZ 23.7 is out there. We've internally cut off 23.8 about a week or so ago. So that'll be going through its final round of integration testing, deployment, etc. So I'd imagine, I don't know when, but very shortly, 23.8 will roll out as a release update as well throughout all the cloud and everything. I know someone's going to put in the chat line that whereas on-prem, I don't get to make those decisions. I'm as equally frustrated as you are because I'd love to see everyone getting access to the full release of 23 AI. But yeah, that's a decision several levels up the tree from where I sit in the Oracle company. But let us proceed. What do we got to talk about tonight? So these are the questions that came in. We've got how to control Apex email, and I'll explain what that means very shortly. Someone asked me how I run my demos, not necessarily in these office hours, which are just SQL Plus scripts, but people have seen my YouTube videos where they either accuse me of being the world's most perfect typist, or it seems that the demos are typing themselves. I would love to say it's my amazing skill at typing, but no, it's the latter. And we'll talk about how that does that, because you might want to use this if you're ever doing a presentation in your office or something. You might want to be able to use that facility as well. It's very easy. Question came in about getting the largest value in a series of columns, how to do that efficiently. The maximum key length. Someone's getting some errors when they're trying to create indexes. We'll explore that one. A selective update trigger, and creating materialized views and what happens when you get errors in doing so. So what they're saying that we've got 6 there tonight. I think I might have left one off the table of contents. I thought I had 7. We'll find out. Okay, so let's start with Apex Mail. Here's the question that came in. Did Apex have a rules engine in its mail facilities so that we can limit domains or control who is allowed to send to certain recipients, etc.? So the question is, Apex, if you don't know, has a mailing facility. It uses the database mailing facilities to actually send email out through the effectively UTL HTTP and UTL mail facilities. Sorry, UTL SMTP. I'm getting ahead of myself. So it has a framework that sits on top of UTL SMTP, but it's nice and rigorous. It's done with background jobs, so it's not done synchronously. And there's all sorts of nice little facilities in there. But is there a rules engine so you can actually build specialized rules about the mail? And the simple answer is no, there is not. Generally, those kind of things are done on your mail server, because otherwise you end up having rules fragmented all over the place. Generally, if you want to control things, then typically on your mail server, where these rules will apply, but maybe there's a need to do it in Apex. So just to give you an idea of how this works, if you're not familiar with Apex, Apex generally is driven by PL SQL procedures. And if you want to send an email, we have an API, Apex Mail. You can see, I put it there. Oh, I didn't put a highlight around it. You can see apexmail.send, for example, and you can refer to Apex items, etc. And apexmail.send does not actually send an email. All it does is puts your message and all the details, the recipient, etc., onto a queue. And then a background job comes along intermittently and grabs that queue and sends emails out. The reason for that is A, it makes email nice and asynchronous, so it's nice and snappy. And also you have that facility now where you have things like retry if you can't talk to your email server. It's just a bit more robust than trying to send an email directly. And also makes the whole process transactional, because you might not want to actually send an email if a transaction rolls back. So that's Apex Email, but you don't get any rules engine. So the first option I would look, when someone says what rules are available, the first thing I would suggest is see if the rules that you're interested in are already in the product. Because one of the things that I see people want to apply rules on, the most common ones, are stuff that we have done in Apex, which is let's make sure that every email comes from, say, a common source, and you can do that. You have a default from email address. And the other ones are, let's make sure that someone doesn't use Apex to do an email spam blast or denial of service attack, etc. So we had those basic rules in there as well in Apex. So you can have the maximum number of emails per workspace. I think that's on a daily basis, maximum emails processed. At the workspace level, you can say the maximum number of email messages. So you might have a total for the entire instance and also a total for each individual workspace. But these are all about generally stopping Apex from being swamped by the email, or stopping Amex from swamping your email server with email. So we don't want to use Apex as a malicious tool. Anything else generally becomes your problem. Now, if that doesn't suit your needs, then I put here, then the ideal solution would be your API around our API. So for example, I could do something like this, and I've actually grabbed this, I think, the basics here from Ask Tom. Every time we send an email from the Ask Tom website, we call our own API, and that's just a layer that sits on top of the Apex Mail API. The reason we have one is to make sure that things like if people have said, I want to unsubscribe, don't send me emails, etc., we make sure we obey all those rules first before we actually call the Apex email. So it would look something like this. You have a basic send mail wrapper that everyone uses. They never call the Apex Mail routine directly. And so you have your rules in there. So, whatever these rules are, whether it's a domain name, whether it's, an email address that might be in a list of blocked things for unsubscription reason, whatever rules you can dream up, you simply code the logic in there. And if you fall through all those rules, then you would go ahead and send the email. This is what I would recommend. Make sure you have an API that sits around our API. The reason I put this in there is because the person that came back to us when they asked this question, they said, look, we don't really have any control. This is for developers. They're all calling the Apex Mail API. They're building applications and deploying them. We can't go back and refactor all our code. And what's more, we can't stop them from calling the Apex Mail API directly. So for that scenario, I wanted to propose a solution that you might find useful. It has some disadvantages, which we'll talk about, but it's a common way of being able to manipulate existing Oracle packages without obviously touching them, because if you were to go manipulate the Oracle Apex code, then you would be in violation of all sorts of license agreements and out of support. So let's show you how we can do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've got to fire up my little Apex app to show you that I've got this simulator app here, which will be used to send email. So I'll bring it up and hopefully you can see it in the screen there. So this one actually isn't doing any emails at all. It's actually because I don't have email turned on this laptop. It doesn't have an email server to talk to. But let's do an example. I'm going to send an email to connor@yahoo.com. That's not really my email address. And I type in whatever text I want to send, and I press send. And it says the email was sent. So here's an example of someone, they built an Apex application. It's calling apex_mail.send, and it seems to work just fine. So the question is, how can we apply some rules there, knowing that we don't have control over the development code? They're just calling Apex Mail directly. So if we look at how this works, almost every package in Apex is exposed to us via a synonym. There is no package called apex_mail. It's actually a synonym to typically something called wwv_something_something_something. We have this one layer of indirection around almost everything in Apex. The reason we do that is it lets us do Apex upgrades much more simply. We simply can put the new version in place and then flip over the synonyms to make the upgrade downtime very, very small. So in this case, you can see on my laptop here, I've got Apex 24.1, which is no longer in use. I've got Apex 24.2, the latest release. But both these things are, the Apex Mail is just a synonym to the underlying true object. Now, if I go describe Apex Mail, we can see it's a database package and it's got a whole stack of stuff: add attachment, get images, etc. All of these obviously sit on top of code inside the package body. And the question is, how can we intercept this in order to put our own rules in without manipulating the Apex code itself, because that's a bad thing to do. So this is what you can do. Because everything in Apex is done via public synonyms, when you call Apex Mail, you're always going to fall through to the public synonym, which means if you build something locally, that will override, or basically that'll take precedence over a public synonym use. So what I'm going to do is, because this Apex workspace we saw, this one here, is running in the rstom schema, I'm going to put a package called Apex Mail in the rstom schema. And it's going to have the exact same send procedure and parameters as the existing Apex Mail one. So I need to now copy every single API call, because we don't know what developers are using apex_mail for. I need to copy every single API and exactly its parameters in order to build effectively a replacement package. So that's the package body, that's all done, and it's just literally a straight cut and paste from the Apex Mail package that runs in the Apex environment. Now for the package body, I need to now flesh out all that stuff. Now I don't need to copy the code inside Apex Mail. That would obviously be very, very complicated and a violation of license. All I need to do is intercept the standard calls with any rules I want to apply. So for example, for the send API, here's my typical send API. I can now add my rules. In this case, I'm saying you're not allowed to send an email to yahoo.com. If I fall through this, how do I now do the standard processing? Well, simple. I just have to fully qualify the name of the true package. So I'm going to call Apex Mail from my workspace. It will run this code, but if the moment it falls through, it'll fall through to the standard Apex routines. So there's the send routine, and there's another send routine, and all the others are simply, falling through to the existing routines. I have to flesh out the entire package body such that the routine works exactly as before. So once I've done that, inside my rstom schema now, whenever someone references Apex Mail, instead of going to the public synonym, they'll go to my own routine. So if I go back to Apex and I try, send another email to yahoo.com, I get an error. Yahoo is blocked. However, if I send it to hotmail.com, showing my age, and try to send that, then that's fine. So this is a nice, easy way of intercepting Apex utilities, if you need to, in order to add your own functionality to turbocharge them, so to speak. Let's get rid of. So this is a way of doing. I'm going to keep an eye. No one's in the chat. Good. Now, one thing I should stress is that approach, I believe, should be your last resort. So let's talk about the downside of doing that. What that means is, because I need to copy every single procedure or function inside that package spec and mimic it with the parameters, etc., that means every time you upgrade, you need to revisit your code to make sure it still aligns, because we are obviously within our rights to change the package spec to whatever we need, or whatever suits the Apex Mail facility. Apex is very good in terms of backward compatibility. What tends to happen is we add parameters with a default of null, such that the existing routines work, but you still need to obviously take a lot of care. That's why I wouldn't recommend this as your first resort. If you can't get everyone to use your own wrapper API, and this is your last resort, then be aware that you're going to pay that price when it comes to every time you apply a patch, every time you apply an Apex upgrade, you need to go revisit that code to make sure it's going to work. And obviously, you might need to actually change the schema name inside all your code as well. So be aware it's possible, but I recommend it as a last resort. By the way, if I start to drown in sweat, very strange in Perth because we're now in spring, in autumn, coming into winter. We've got this heat wave this week. It's literally, in the old language, in Fahrenheit, it's over 100 every day this week so far. Today was about 105, so 38 degrees if you're if you live in a modern society. So yeah, very, very warm at the moment. And for your benefit, I always turn the air conditioner off so we don't get that annoying hum in the background. Okay, largest column value. Here's the question that came in. I load a spreadsheet of values into a temporary table where the numeric values go across the page in columns. Don't you love the way people do data modeling in Excel? I need to find the highest value for each row. I don't know how many columns will be populated for each row. How can I do it? Now, the first thing I looked at when I saw this is I don't know how many columns will be populated for each row. I'm assuming that classic thing of Excel being a free format, sort of layout. People just put in data wherever they want. An Excel spreadsheet comes down. We typically use something like Apex to load it in. When it says I don't know how many columns, one would assume there must be a ceiling, because if you're loading it into a table, that table must have those columns pre-prepared. So I'm working on the assumption that we have a table with a lot of columns. When we say populated, I'm assuming that some of these columns will be null, but obviously there must be a ceiling on the number of columns. We'll work on that assumption. Let's now do a demo. So I'm going to keep this nice and simple. Typically, Excel spreadsheets obviously can come up with an arbitrary number of columns. I don't know what the limit is. It goes to I don't know. I can't remember. It goes A through Z, then it goes AA, all the AZ, etc., etc. So I don't know. Let's say thousands of columns, but we'll keep it nice and simple. We just got 3. We've got column 1, 2, and 3. I'll put a row in there for Connor, a row in there for Sue, okay, and a row in there for Pete. So the requirement here is when I look across each row, what is the highest value out of each of these 3 columns? Now, that's very easy to do. You're probably immediately thinking, I'll just use the greatest function. So greatest column 1, 2, and 3, and you can see there that works just fine. Now you need to be careful when it comes to greatest. Let's now insert a 4th row with 12, 13, and null. This is an example of not all the columns being populated. This is just a blank field in the Excel cell that came in. What happens when you run greatest on any attribute where one of the elements in the greatest call is a null? Well, you get the null. It's that classic thing where a null is automatically lower than everything else, automatically higher than everything else, automatically not anything else. So yes, unfortunately, whenever you do greatest and one of the parameters or input parameters into greatest is null, that's the value that's always going to come out. So you get something like this, which is obviously not what we wanted to do. So the solution to that is now you have to come up with some mechanism of making sure that every column is present in some way using MVL. Now, MVL, that's an easy solution, but the moment you have that, we hit that typical problem with MVL, which is, what do you choose for this value here? Now, I'm assuming here these are all positive integers, but how do I know that? If I'm loading an Excel spreadsheet, what do? You have this awkward thing. So NVL becomes something you have to come up with. Now, you could replace this with case when column 1 is null, then whatever, etc. But now, once again, you've got this problem of still choosing a value that you need to know, and also it's getting very long and winded to write this query. So let's drop the table. Let's now do the same thing with 6 columns to show how annoying this would get. I'm not going to change any of the data I put in. I'm just going to reference the first 3 columns. But of course now columns 4, 5, and 6 are all null for all the rows. So you can see very quickly how this is going to start extending. Now I've got an NVL for every single column. If I got 500 columns, that's an unpleasant SQL to write. So my question was, can we do better? Can we make it easier to actually do this? So let's explore some options here. So the first thing we could do is, as we know that if rows come across the page in Excel, which is a typical thing, often they actually really mean they were meant to be rows in a table. So we can unpivot them. If you've never seen the unpivot syntax, effectively unpivot is taking columns and transposing them into rows. So what I'm doing is I'm going to say I'm going to generate for each row in my table, for example, Connor, I'm going to take each column 1, and it's going to create a row with a value of 1 in this column called C, or in that column called col. Column 2 will have a new row with a value of 2. Column 3 will have a new row with a value of 3, etc., etc. So we can see now, because there were 3 columns populated for the entry of Connor, we get 3 rows. 3 rows for Sue, 3 rows for Pete, and only 2 rows for Mike. But we can see now what we've done is we've taken these columns and turned them into row values. And of course, once they're row values, we can do a simple group by. Now, one of the nice things with Pivot is, if this is like getting annoying, you think, I don't want to be typing all this kind of stuff, is if you just list the column names, then what happens is you just get the column name as the actual flag or attribute value inside the column here. So that's, just a nice shorthand now. This is, maybe you still think this is worse than the NVLs, but at least now I just list the columns ad infinitum. None of this changes. I just simply add more and more columns to this unpivot clause. Once I've unpivoted them, then it's just a typical group by. I simply grab the name, grab the max high val, and I group by the name, and I get the same result. And I no longer have these null hassles. So this is probably your first option I would look at doing. You can simply unpivot them, and this is the only element of that SQL you need to change over time, and you just simply add the columns as you go. Here's another option. This is probably the shortest I could think of. I was trying to dream out ways of making this nice and compact. This is a little bit of trickery. Sys ODCI number list is a pre-delivered V-array, a V-array of numbers in the Oracle database. It's an object type. So what we can do is we can construct, using all these columns, we can turn this into effectively an array of numbers. If it's an object type, which is an array of numbers, you can do SQL on it, and the default column name out of that is column value. So I can simply do max column value. I then do a scalar select, so effectively it's almost like a small join, and I get the same result. So, hello everyone from the Republic of Kosovo. There we go. Lovely to have people from around the world. Welcome. Welcome to Perth in Australia. So this is probably the shortest syntax I could come up with in terms of, once again, all this we have to do is list the columns in here, and you could do it this way. Then here's another way you could explore. Right? I like this one because in this way, you actually don't need to list the columns. You don't care how many columns there. So let's have a look at how this one works. I'm going to take, effectively, all the columns in my table, so name, column 1, column 2, column 3, etc., and turn it into a JSON object. Then I'm going to remove the item in there called name, leaving me with just column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So if I run that, you get something like this. I get name before, and this element called JSON array is actually now effectively a JSON array of the elements in those columns. The name was in there originally. Originally it had Connor 12, 13, etc., but I've removed that using a remove name. But effectively now I've got a JSON array with all the elements in it. Now, I can actually use something, this is in 21 onwards, I'm not sure this will work in 19C, but from in 21 and 23, I can also say, I don't want the elements that are null in there. So now I get the same result, but now I've just got the 3 numbers, or the virtual number of columns that are in there. So now I've got the name column and a JSON array of all the numbers of interest. Notice I've never referenced the column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. I've let the JSON transformation do it for me. Having done that, I can now, because I've now got a column with a string of a name and a JSON array, I now need to pivot that JSON array into a list of numbers that I can sum up. So I can do a lateral, which basically lets me do a join while referencing elements from the other table in the join. I use JSON table, and I'm simply going to basically go get all the elements from that JSON array and do a max from all of them. And at the end of it, I get my same result back. So there's a little bit of trickery. I'd imagine computationally that's expensive to do because we're converting data into JSON, then we're doing a bit of processing with it, then converting it to rows, and then doing a max. But the nice thing with that is there's no limit and there's no reference to the column. So if you have some table with 1,000 columns and you don't want to type in 1,000 column names, this little JSON trick might be something you might find useful to use. I just thought I'd throw it in because it just shows that there are so many uses for some of the JSON functions inside our Oracle database that won't necessarily be about dealing purely with JSON. Most of our things are short tonight. I reckon we'll finish early. How's that for a big call? I don't think we've ever finished early, so that could be a goal for tonight. Maximum key length. Here's the question that came in. We extract 16 bytes from an incoming string as it is the GUID from a remote system. This is that typical thing you see when people are generating GUIDs at the application tier, not in the database, typically in lieu of a primary key. In fact, yeah. However, when we try to use that as a primary key on our database, it gives a ORA 1450 maximum key length 639 exceeded error. And the question is, what's going on? So this is really a discussion about knowing how data types get formed in the Oracle database, especially when you're using PL SQL or other functionality. And I'll also show you a little cool thing that comes in 23 AI, which makes this problem less of an issue in the general case, not just this particular specialized case of extracting GUIDs. So to show you what the problem is, I'm in Oracle 21 here, Oracle 21 and below, this is the same. I've got two columns, C1 varchar 2 10,000 and C2 varchar 100. If you've never seen a column with varchar 2 10,000, check out max string size extended. It came in way back in Oracle 12, the ability to actually have varchar 2 32K as opposed to varchar 2 4000. I can obviously create an index on column C2 because it's only 100 characters long. But in version 21 and below, if I try to create an index on anything with a size longer than 6398, I get this, or 6397, I get this error. Right? I can't create an index on things that are massive. And the reason for this is in the moment Oracle thinks you could potentially have an index key that with all its appropriate metadata would exceed the size of a index leaf block, then we got a problem. And so that's effectively the limitation we have. You can't have an index key greater than 6397. I generally can't think of reasons why you would want to do that anyway, but anyway, the limitation is there. Now, this doesn't really apply, however, to the question that came in. They're saying we've got a 16-byte GUID, why can't we do it? And I thought, okay, well, let's explore what's going on here. So I dropped my table and recreated C1 with a raw 16, a typical kind of thing we might store to store a GUID, raw 16 or raw 32, something along those lines. And I can create an index just fine on that. So I went back to the question. I said, what's going on? I showed them this demo. I said, there's no problems with creating indexes on raws. What are you doing? And then they gave us a bit more information as to what they were actually doing. So let me drop the table again and walk through the process that they were doing and show you why we get the problem. As I said, they have an incoming string coming in. I've simply chose it to be varchar 230. And out of that incoming string, they extract a component which turns out to be the GUID they want. So this is what they had. They had a PL SQL function called calculate the GUID, in comes a string, and it turned out, I can't remember exactly where theirs was, but I'm making this example very, very simple, that it turns out that in this case, the GUID, the appropriate bytes of the GUID start at byte number 9. So some other stuff comes in as the prefix, but the GUID component starts at byte number 9 in this simplified example. And what they did was they said, well, given that we're storing the string, we can simply use a virtual column, very cool piece of technology, to actually extract that and have it as a virtual column on my table. So they'll simply add effectively a GUID as calculate the GUID, in comes the string in C1, pass it to that PL SQL function, and simply convert the hexadecimal to raw. And this is how it works. I insert some data. Here's the incoming string. Here's the string that's of no particular purpose in this case. And everything that trailed from byte number 9 onwards was actually the hex representation of the GUID. And so we can store it. And this is very cool. This is why virtual columns are very cool. Here's my actual physical data, and I extract the component that's a GUID, and that's going to be my primary key. And they said, fine, this all works fine. Let's add a unique key to it. And they get this error. Very strange. We can see this thing is tiny. In this case, I've made it very, very small. Why are we getting this error? Well, it's the fact that we used a virtual column. Because a virtual column that calls a PL SQL function has to make some assumptions as to how big that data could be returned. And as you know, with a PL SQL function, you don't say a PL SQL function returns a varchar to 10. You say it returns a varchar 2, or returns a number, or returns a date, etc. So when I describe my table, this is what the database had assumed. It said if you've got a PL SQL function that's returning a raw, it could return me up to 32,000 bytes of raw. I don't know. And as a result, the moment you try to create an index on anything which is bigger than 6,000 bytes, you get the error. So let's drop that column and see how this is an easy fix. All we have to do is give the database some more information. We simply say, when you're adding this virtual column and you're running this PL SQL function, right, let's bring it back as a raw 32. because we know a GUI is never going to be more than 32 raw bytes. And now, just like that, as easy as that, we can actually make a unique key. It literally is that simple. It's not necessarily about the PL/SQL function. It's the fact that the data type that gets assumed by the database for things like views and virtual columns, it has to assume the largest, I won't say the worst case scenario, it has to assume the largest possible case, and we get that restriction. Now you might be thinking, I could have solved this by simply nominating a data type. I could simply say, when I'm adding the virtual column, you can also nominate a data type, and it just comes back as that, right? See what happens. Doesn't work it, right? Because this is a rule that comes in. It says this might be up to 32K, so we're not going to let you nominate a restrictive data type. You have to actually have the cast in there. So be aware, this is a common mistake that you might make. So once again, just to refresh, my dog's come over to say hello. Hello. Just to refresh our memory, I started with this simple case of a 10,000 character column and I couldn't put an index on it. Let's now flip over to Oracle 23 AI, also running on this machine. So now I'm running 23.7, the version that came out very, very recently. I create that same table, 10,000 characters. Let's try create an index on it. It works. This is a change in 23 AI. We have now changed this. We've made this a little bit more flexible for you. We haven't actually changed the rules internally. You still can't have these giant, massive keys inside your index. What the rule we've changed is we're going to do it on a data basis as opposed to a definition basis. So even though this thing is allowed to be 10,000 characters long, as long as you stay below that 6 kilobyte limit, we're going to let you have that index. So I can put in, obviously, a single character. I can put in 4,000 characters. That's no problems as well. If I try put in 8,000 characters, now I get the error. So we haven't changed the internal structure. We've simply changed the rule as to when you get the error. You now get it at when the data violates the rule as opposed to just the definition of the table changing the rule. So be aware of that. If you did hit this, if you for some reason had index keys that are longer than 6,300, this is based on a factor of the block size. So what you would do is if you desperately needed an index key that was that big, I don't know why, you would simply maybe create a 16K table space or a 32K table space if your platform supported it and put your index in there to gain access to another 8K or 16K of size. But the first thing I would do is have a good long think about why you have index keys that are more than 6K long in size. Hannah said, can I choose not to use this check length and insert and revert to the default behavior as early versions? I think the answer to that is no. And I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I suspect that's a choice of you'd rather find out at the start as opposed to when your application is operation. And I do take that point. But yeah, the overwhelming consensus from customers was they found our using the data type definition as being too restrictive. My guess is, I shouldn't be cynical about the development world out there, but my guess is this is a reflection of the fact that so many people nowadays don't care about their strings. They go, oh yeah, I don't know how big the strings will be. We're going to make all our string fields varchar2 4000 or varchar2 32,000, etc. I suspect that's that's Bitbucket is the term I was looking for. Excellent talk. Okay. Materialized views. Here's the question that came in. This is a common one. It's come up and asked Tom very commonly. I thought I'd throw it in there tonight. I have a materialized view privilege. Sorry, I have the Let's start again. You can tell I'm getting burnt out. I can't read. Okay, maybe I should put the glasses on. Maybe that'll help. Oh, that makes it worse. I have the... Oh, my God. Okay, take 7. I have the create materialized view privilege, but when I try to create one, I get an error. What could be the problem? Now, first of all, I'm going to have a rant. And the rant is this. This I see on Twitter DMs, on Ask Tom, on forums, etc. And if you're the person who asked this question and you're on the call, I apologize in advance for taking you to task in particular, but I just needed to vent it. This is the 4 words that every customer support professional or community professional, anyone that just wants to make customers succeed, hates is I got an error or I get an error. Yeah, we don't have crystal balls. Yeah, I can't even read the slides. We don't have crystal balls. We can't see what your error is. Whenever you're asking a question, if you get an error, for the love of everything in technology, please tell us what the error is. That's okay, end of rant. Okay, I went back to this person. I said, yes, what is the error you're getting? I'm getting insufficient privileges, even though I have that privilege. Let's see what the issue is and why it's an easy fix. Let's show this example. I'm going to create a user called MV demo, simple password. We'll give them 100 megabytes on the user's table space so they can consume some space. And we'll create a table. It's just a copy of scott.emp, and they got their own emp table. And they want to create a materialized view. So we'll give them the ability to log on. Fair enough. And we'll give them the create materialized view privilege, which, as the name suggests, would suggest to you that they should be able to create a materialized view. I connect as them and I try create a materialized view, and it says insufficient privileges. And yes, I happily take criticism that this seems a stupid thing for Oracle to do, because why would we have the privilege in the first place and not respect it? Here's the simple fix. Log on as a administrative user and grant create table as well. That's all you need to do. So let's go back, reconnect as MV demo, and there you go. So the question is why? I'll come back to why when we finish the rest of the demo, and I'll explain what's going on. Now, this seems relatively straightforward, but one thing I should make you aware of is this rule also applies if you're trying to do it as an administrator. For example, if I connect as a DBA, a high-level administrator now, I drop my MV demo user and recreate them. Exactly the same before, but now as an administrator, I want to create a materialized view on their behalf. I'm connected as DBA, I've got all the power in the world. If I try to do the same thing, put a materialized view in their schema, I get the same error. So be aware, even if you're a DBA, you must give the create table privilege to the person that is going to own that materialized view. Let's talk about why. Well, the first part why is it's right there in the docs. In the docs, it says you need to have the create table privilege or create any table privilege in order to do this. So it's right there in the docs. It's not like some mystery. The question is, why would we have this? Well, this is when I say relatively recent, we're talking back in Oracle 7 edition. In the in the very early days of materialized views, they were called snapshots. We had create snapshots, and the only way you could refresh a snapshot was with a call to dbms, refresh, etc., snapshot refresh, and the only mechanism we used was delete and insert. That's all we did. If it was a fast refresh, we would do effectively just the deltas, but it was always DML. That was the only way you could actually refresh a materialized view, a snapshot. Now, as materialized views became incredibly popular, especially in warehouse environments, the cost of doing a delete and an insert became very, very high. And people said, we would like other mechanisms to do it. One of the mechanisms was what we called a non-atomic refresh, which means rather than doing delete and insert to refresh the materialized view, we would simply do a truncate and insert again. So much more efficient if you didn't care about the fact that there was a little time where the materialized view was empty. So effectively, you truncate the materialized view and then you populate the data. Far less expensive than doing a delete, far quicker to do the refresh, especially a refresh complete, but obviously it now requires, effectively we're now dealing with segments. And the next step beyond that was people said, well, I'd like that benefit, but without the big downtime. And so, people being able to see that my materialized view is empty after I truncated it. Then we introduced a thing called out of place refresh, which is a cool technology which says we'll leave your materialized view in place. We'll build a new version of the materialized view and then flip it over, effectively just manipulate the dictionary definition to suddenly make your refreshed materialized view available to you. So they're all the options available to you simply using the same API call in dbms mview.refresh. Now that last one means building a brand new structure, building a brand new table, which will become your materialized view. And of course, we don't know which of the refresh mechanisms you'll opt to use. You could choose the delete, insert, refresh. You could choose just the atomic refresh, or you could choose the out of place refresh. You have that freedom. Therefore, in order to support all of those, we have to have the ability to create tables, hence the create table privilege. So hopefully that explains why it's there. Okay, let's talk about demos. Are you a perfect typist, or are you using some sort of software for the demos in your video? I have to admit, I was sort of offended when this question came in. I was like, surely you just accept that I'm a perfect typist. But let's face it, anyone that's actually seen me type on this keyboard, especially when there's a microphone in the way, realizes that my typing skills are rudimentary at best. So the way I do my demos when I'm doing YouTube videos or any kind of video, I use a little facility in Python, which I thought I'd show you, and because it just, and if anyone wants to do it themselves, then they can make use of it. So let's have a look at this little demo to show you how it's all done. Let's assume I'm doing a demo where all I'm doing is going through a pre-written script, much like many of the demos I do on these videos. Then here's an example. Here's my demo called PyDemo, and what it's going to do is it's going to run a query from the employee table. It might put out some text. There's pauses in there so we can actually pause and see the results on screen, just like the demos I'm doing, about to do here. And then we do another one here, etc. So I don't need Python for this. If I'm just running a demo like that and I run it, it would look something like this. It shows me some stuff, then it pauses. I could talk about the results, etc. It shows me the next query. There's some prompts, etc. So that's how these demos can work if I'm just running them through and they're pre-scripted. However, maybe I want that same demo to literally work as if I'm typing it live. And that's obviously sometimes more compelling when you're showing it to an audience rather than you just hitting enter, etc. Sometimes it looks nice to actually show it being built on the fly on the screen. Now, I found a little utility called PyAutoGUI, which does this, which lets you, Python will take input and literally send it to an active window on your Windows or Linux, Macintosh screen, etc. This is how it works. This is what you have to do. I'm going to start up a command prompt in Windows. I'm going to run my SQL+21 script, and then I'm going to literally type these things. You can see I'm typing in clear screen, then I hit enter, then I type the first line of my query, hit enter, and I can choose the keyboard speed, etc. And between each one, I can choose how long I'm going to sleep. So I wrote this now to mimic the script we just saw. So what we can do is we'll actually give it a go. So I'm going to now start this Python script. Right, it runs. There we go. It starts SQL21. Here I am. I'm simulating my typing and clear the screen, and then I select, etc. You can see it's literally, my hands are up here. It's typing for me. But this can be a very compelling thing when you're doing demos for people because they're watching the demo in real time, actually what's going on. So it's chugging away, etc., etc. And it's fed, and I think it's done. So there we go. You can say I'll kill that SQL+F. You can see I basically, my little Python script here sets the path and actually runs that Python thing you just saw. So that's how it works. There's no magic here. It's nice and simple. But of course, anyone seeing this is probably going, you expect me to write this every time I want to run a SQL script? No, thank you. And rest assured, because I do a lot of these things, I got very, very fed up with this as well. So what I did was I wrote a PL/SQL function that will read a SQL script and convert it to the equivalent Python script. So it's a little function called genpy. If I do it, you can see what it is it's a pipeline function that's going to spit out lines of strings. What I do is, this is the standard part that's the same of all of them. It is always import the various Python modules, and I'm going to start up SQL+21. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read an external table, the external table being the SQL script I've written. So I've got my SQL script written that runs in SQL+ just fine. I'm going to read it as an external table. And I don't have to create an external table. I can do it on the fly using this nice simple syntax. And then what I'm doing is I'm simply typing each row out, making sure I'm putting, for example, a sleep. Instead of if there's a pause, I'll do a sleep too. I'm simply, I've got enters, etc. I'm simply converting effectively my SQL script into the Python equivalent. So having done that now, remember we ran at the start of this thing, a pydemo.sql. I can now do genpy on that pydemo.sql, and it gives me the Python I require, more or less. So I simply spool that out, and there's my Python script. So if you're interested in this, please, you can hit me up on Twitter, etc. You can just go up, etc. Oh, Rob says that I submitted a question to the poll a couple of weeks ago. How did my question be answered during the session? That's a great question, Rob. I have to admit, I normally get email notification when that happens, and I haven't seen one. So I apologize, but I will go check the portal at the end of this call. I won't do it now because we're running out of time, but I promise you whatever you asked, I'll either answer in next month's office hours, or if you send me a Twitter DM with your contact details, I'll answer it as soon as I can, maybe tomorrow morning. Hopefully that is helpful. My apologies for not seeing that. So yeah, so if you're interested in that Python stuff and you want to do little demos, for example, at your workplace or your next conference event, once again, hit me up on Twitter. I can send you the code, etc. It's easy to do. Nice tip to simulate working, Carsten says. That's like remember the old boss screens? Yeah, when you were playing games at work and up comes an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, it's 9:51, 9:52, and I think this is our last one. So I think we're going to get everything done. Selective update triggers. Here's the question that came in. I have a compound trigger for updates on a table, but I only want to fire the trigger if a particular column value is changing. Is that possible? And the answer is, well, no, declaratively, and well, maybe. We'll go with that. So what we'll do is I'll walk you through how the various scenarios and where I ended up in terms of which I think is a pretty cool solution. Here's a simple table. It's got a primary key. I'm not putting a primary key on it, but we call it primary key column, C2, C3, C4. Put a simple set of values in there. And this is our simple trigger to start with, the compound trigger. So we're going to explore with a compound trigger. And as anyone who hasn't seen compound triggers before, effectively it lets you do all the various trigger types in a single trigger processing. So in this case, I'm going to fire the trigger only for an update on the table called T, but we'll actually spit out before the statement starts, we'll spit out something every time we touch a row, and spit out something after the statement finishes. So we're starting with this base level trigger that will obviously fire for any single update. And we can actually do a little test here. If I change C2, the trigger fires before, during, and after. And if I change C3, it fires before, during, and after. So that's a very simple baseline, a starting point for our trigger. We're going to try extend this and improve it now such that it only fires when we want it to. And for the purpose of this demonstration, our focus is on column C2. We're only interested now if we're changing the value of C2 that we want this trigger to fire. So this was my first attempt. My first attempt was simply this simple addition. And if you're unaware of this, this works on normal triggers as well. When you have for update, you can actually nominate a column or columns. So in this case, I'm saying I only want to fire this update trigger when I'm updating C2. So let's see what benefit that trigger has had. Now, when I update C2, I get before, during, and after, as I expect. When I update C3, it doesn't fire. Fantastic. But here's the problem. This person said, I only want to fire the trigger if the column changes. In this case, I'm setting column C2 to itself. And even if I have no change in the data, we fire before, during, and after. So we've made improvement. We're not now firing excessively for non-C2 columns, but unfortunately, if we're leaving C2 unchanged, we are still firing the trigger. So the challenge now is to improve upon this. So this is the next thing I tried. I said, we got for update C2, that handles the C3. Now, if you didn't know, even on a compound trigger, you can add a when clause. A lot of people are familiar with the when clause on a row level trigger, but were unaware that they thought, well, where do I do it in a compound trigger? You simply nominate it at the top. Now, be aware that just because it's nominated at the top doesn't mean it fires for all three parts. It only makes sense at a row level. It won't, the when doesn't apply here and it doesn't apply here. It only applies at the row level, but you can actually have it in this query. So I'm saying when new does not equal old, let's see how we go. So when I change C2, before, during, after. Excellent, that works. When I change C3, trigger doesn't fire at all. Awesome. When I set C2 itself, before and after, but not during. So the trigger did fire, but I didn't do anything in the row level. So I would call that a success. Life's good. There's one small problem. What if I set C2 to null? Now C2 was a value of 2 before this. I've set it to null, and guess what? My trigger did not fire, or effectively my row level trigger did not fire. That's a problem because I have indeed changed C2. It's gone from some value to another value, and I got this problem. Those pesky nulls always come back and bite us. So then I said, okay, let's have a look at how we can explore this. Rather than have the when in there, because the when didn't really help, I've actually done it in good old-fashioned PL/SQL code. So when the two values are the same, or both of them are null, then I don't want this thing to fire. So that's a nice simple check. If they're the same or they're both null, and if they're the same or they're both null, I do not want it to fire the trigger, and so I put a not around there to fire the trigger. So let's give that a go. I change C2 before, during, after. Excellent. I change C2 itself before and after. Excellent, that's working. I do this and I get the same problem. There's a problem with my logic. Now, this is once again those pesky nulls. Menzel said I could use in the when clause, but you'll see why it's going to be problematic. This looks like a valid statement to have, but once again, we need to keep in our mindset always how those nulls mess us around. If one of these two is null, this condition here comes as null, not as false. And now I've got null or something else, and null combined with anything always comes back as null. A not of null is null, which means this thing never gets run. So conceptually, logically in our Boolean minds, this looks fine, but it's actually wrong because nulls could mess it up. I can replace it with this. This is actually just expanding it out, which is the proper definition. I'm saying if one is null and the other is not null, or the first one is null, not null, and the other one is null, or they don't equal each other, then this works. All right, so having padded out this query, I could put it in here or in the when. Now I have, if I change C2, I get before, during, after. Excellent. If I set C2 to itself, I don't get the row level trigger. Excellent. If I do a null, I now get the row level trigger, which is what I wanted because I've changed it from a not null to a null. So at that point, I'm fine. I'm done. So this is good, but I've got that big chunk of code in there and I have to put that in there for wherever I need it. So let's explore very briefly what we're at the challenge we're up against here. And I've done this little grid here, just done a little grid here, which is if X and Y don't equal each other, the trigger should fire. If they equal each other, the trigger should not fire. If one's null and the other is not, then it should fire and that. So whatever condition I come up with should be X, not XX, not. So basically fire, 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 3 fires in this particular scenario. And I was just exploring this. A lot of these don't work. I was just saying, okay, well, let's try, what about ln NVL? Things like that. That gets me close. I get yes, no, yes, yes, no. Then I tried, what about a null if, etc. to see if some of these sort of permutations with nulls and booleans would help me get to this utopian state of X, X, X here. None of them worked. But one thing that does work, and I never worked out whether this was a bug or by design, but Decode has a very odd understanding of nulls. What Decode does is it treats nulls as equivalent. So I'm saying compare these two values, X and Y. If they're the same, come with 1, otherwise return 0. And notice with the Decode, even if the values are both null, it assumes they are the same. Breaks all that rules about nulls not equaling nulls, but Decode just treats nulls as the same. And notice here, if I look at the results of test 3, which is the Decode, I get 0, 0, 0, which lines up with when the trigger should fire. So a Decode would work. But of course, Decode is a SQL function, not a pure SQL function. However, what's interesting is the way a when clause is applied is internally with SQL. So you can put a Decode function inside a when clause, even though you can't do it inside pure SQL. So this is probably my final solution, I think the nicest way of doing it. Let's test it out. If I change C2 before, during, and after, correct. If I don't change C2, then I get just before and after, what I wanted. If I set it to null, then yes, I do get before, during, and after. So the Decode inside the when, I think, is probably the most efficient way I could come up with doing it. And on that note, look at that. We are done 30 seconds late. I think that's the best I've ever done. Let me stop my share. Hopefully you found some of that stuff useful today. Rob, please, yes. So as I said, find me on Twitter. Rob, please send me a message. My apologies for not touching your question. I'll try to work out why that email didn't come through. But yes, I'll try to get it answered for you as soon as I can because that's poor form. So once again, as always, thank you very much for your time. Hope you found something useful, something valuable out of this. And what have we got? Easter coming up shortly. So if you celebrate Easter, please have a safe and happy holiday period. And I'll see you hopefully next month, sometime late April, for office hours. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and keep working with your Oracle user groups. Bye for now, everybody.